Hey, friends, and welcome back to the RevRx Podcast. I'm so excited about introducing you to our special guest. Matter of fact, I think I'll let her introduce herself. She is fascinating. You're going to love Dr. Leslie Wickman. She has a very unique background. She has a background in aerodynamics, aeronautics, and astronautics. She has a background as a little bit of an apologist, right?
Yeah,
You have a background in women's beach volleyball and
true.
professional American tackling football women's league.
Exactly.
I'm probably butchering this, but I want to show the well-roundedness here. And you've gained the reputation as Rocket Girl, I believe is one of your many nicknames. And then not only that, but you have been involved with the design of some pretty famous, and I'll let you tell this, some pretty famous fountains in Las Vegas that you may recognize. But Leslie Wickman, thanks so much for joining us and welcome to the show.
Thanks, Chad. It's my pleasure.
I remember first coming across your profile, and it was the apologetics that caught me. I'm a big believer that part of our lives as faithful believers in Christ needs to be understanding why we believe what we believe. And so you're doing great work in that field, particularly where science meets faith, and I want to get into that. But before we do, I'd love for you just to tell us a little bit about yourself. You have such a fascinating background. How have those paths kind of come across for you? And where do you find yourself today? You're doing some unique work.
Yeah, thank you. That's a really nice introduction. Thanks, Chad. So my story goes back to growing up in a Christian home on the Olympic Peninsula in Washington State, kind of basically the farthest northwest that you can get in the continental United States without moving into Canada. We lived in really remote areas. My dad was in the forestry industry, and so we always lived where it rained a lot and the trees grew really tall, and there weren't a lot of people around. So it was a pretty isolated area, but it was a great place to grow up, and a lot of people call it God's country. And of course, I know they say that about just about every place around.
That's right.
But anyway, I grew up in a Christian home and came to faith at an early age. At the ripe old age of 9, I had a really profound experience at a Bible camp where I felt like God was calling me to be a missionary in a far off land. And I was not happy about that. Here I am, 9 years old, little kid, thinking about moving across some ocean and, living in very Spartan conditions, and away from my family and home and everything I knew. And so I went back to my cabin and cried myself to sleep for about 3 or 4 nights in a row. And that's, how profound the sense of calling was.
Yeah.
Yet my resistance to it. And after several nights of that, I finally just surrendered. And I just said, okay, Lord, I'll do whatever you want me to do. And I can remember it like it was yesterday, which, it's been quite a few years ago. But I was just flooded with this overwhelming sense of peace.
Yeah.
And just knowing that everything was going to be okay because I was accepting God's call in my life, And so I, over the years, kept that in mind. And, I seriously thought that God was calling me overseas, and went on several short-term mission trips. And each time I was kind of thinking, okay, is this it? Is God going to call me into a full-time missionary position? Which never really happened in the way that I thought it would. But one of the trips that I went on with Athletes in Action Volleyball, I went to South Africa. And in my little 9-year-old brain, it was always Africa that I felt like if God was calling me to a specific place, it was Africa. And so as I was preparing for that trip, I had, shared with some of my friends, and one of my friends suggested that I read Paulo Coelho's The Alchemist. I don't know if you remember that, but he writes in the style of C.S. Lewis with allegory, and so I read it on the plane on my way to Africa. And it's basically this story about a shepherd boy in Spain who discovers a map to a hidden treasure on his family's farm in Spain, and then takes this very circuitous route to get to the location in Africa where the actual treasure is. And so I went into my, short-term mission trip with Athletes in Action in South Africa thinking, wow, this is really interesting. I don't know what God's going to do with this, but I'm headed to Africa. And during the time that I was there, we played in these volleyball tournaments, and before every volleyball tournament, the women would gather and pray. I mean, the local women had this tradition. And so we'd pray before every tournament and then play the tournament and then have a time to share our faith with the players and the audience and whatnot. And during the time that I was there, I realized it's like, this is something that I can do at home. It doesn't have to be overseas. And so shortly after that, I started playing with this women's professional football team and was almost immediately dubbed the chaplain for the team as the most religious person, right? But it was really a neat experience because, the women would come to me with their prayer requests and that sort of thing. It was actually a really, really cool experience. That and playing tackle football on top of it which was also interesting.
Yeah, sure. I love it.
But anyway, so that eventually I realized that my true calling was kind of the mission field of science and faith and helping people to understand that science and faith are compatible and that you don't have to choose between the two. And I've kind of skipped over a lot of stuff. I want to circle back to one thing, though, that is very relevant to the story. And that is when I reached junior high. Remember, I had this really profound experience when I was 9 years old. And a few years later in junior high school, I encountered my first atheist biology teacher. And he would go so far as to say, you might just as well leave your faith at the door because what we're going to talk about here is almost certainly going to contradict what you've learned at church and Sunday school. Yeah. And, here I'm 11, 12 years old, I guess. And I'm thinking, this just doesn't make sense to me. If God is who he claims to be as a creator of all this, then how can studying his creation contradict who he is? It just didn't make sense. And so that class was a struggle for me, I have to say. But looking back on it, I'm actually grateful because it set me on the path of figuring out how science and faith are compatible from a really early age. And from that point on, I just basically tried to learn whatever I could about science and faith and how they fit, and diving into the scriptures. And I was an avid Bible reader from the time I was quite young, and I remember there were times when I was, in the habit of underlining. And I remember getting so carried away with the underlining. You'd look at my Bible and I'd have like whole books underlined.
Whole things underlined. Right,
exactly. Kind of defeats the purpose. But anyway, like I said, that really set me on the path of trying to figure it out, but fast forward to college, and, I was always told by my high school teachers, you're really good in math and science, you really ought to consider a STEM program in college. And at the time, though, I didn't have things figured out well enough. I still had this impression that there was some sort of disconnect that I didn't know yet between science and faith. And so I kind of shied away from STEM fields in college. And I took a lot of math and science, but I didn't major in it because I just didn't know what I was going to do with it or how to reconcile it yet. So I majored in political science, of all things, and headed off for the U.S. State Department to do an internship my senior year. And realized there that in order to get anywhere in the State Department, I needed an advanced degree. And I was really interested. This is going to take us back to, when the Cold War was still raging and the arms race between the U.S. and the Soviet Union. And so I was really interested in arms control. And I thought, it'd probably be really helpful if I had a technical degree so that some of the people that, are negotiating over these weapons systems, they don't have a clue how they actually work. I thought, well, that's something I could maybe bring to the table. So, with my bachelor's in poli-sci in hand, I applied to Stanford University to get into their master's in aerospace engineering program, thinking, what's wrong with that? In hindsight, I'm like, naivete, right? Right. Anyway, I got admitted, which I have to say, I think was an act of God in and of itself. And it was probably the hardest thing academically I've ever done, was to kind of transition from a bachelor's degree in poli-sci to a master's degree in aerospace engineering. I bet. But I made it through. And along the way, I was still kind of, figuring out those connections between science and faith. And from there, I went to work at Lockheed in Northern California and went to work on the Hubble Space Telescope program and the International Space Station program, all the while, again, still trying to, read and have conversations with people about science and faith. And so over time, I started to realize, that they are compatible. And the more that I would dig into the sciences, the more I would see compatibility with the God of the Bible. And so I went back to school and got my PhD. While I was at Lockheed, I went through astronaut training and became the astronaut interface engineer for these different programs that we were working on. Let's see. So shortly after I finished my PhD, Lockheed was going through a merger with Martin Marietta, and their kind of future in terms of spaceflight, human spaceflight, I should say, became a little less clear, and they weren't really sure what to do with me as a corporate astronaut, so to speak. And so they started kind of shuffling me around the company, doing different things. And meanwhile, I just got my PhD. I was ready to go, really dig into something. And so then this gentleman who was the CEO of the company that designed and built the Bellagio fountains in Las Vegas started recruiting me. and I was like, this is so weird. I mean, it's kind of a total departure from the aerospace industry and what I've been doing. But at the same time, the aerospace industry was kind of at a standstill, and it was also following the 2 shuttle accidents. And so there was just a lot of uncertainty. And so I thought, Lord, I need your direction. I need your guidance. And that was one of the things I learned in that experience with when I was 9 years old, was just to always go to God with my request for guidance in terms of every fork in the road, and so God gave me a pretty clear sign that he wanted me to take this job. And so that moved me from Northern California to Southern California, and complete change in, career direction. But in the process of getting me to Southern California, so I worked on the Bellagio fountains. I didn't mean to just kind of say that and then drop it, but that was about a 2.5-year stint, and really exciting. We were sitting on the sidewalk on the Strip in Las Vegas at the side of the lake, the Bellagio lake in front of the hotel, programming the fountain. And there was a cyclone fence between the sidewalk and the street, and people would come by and just kind of hang on the fence and watch the routines that we'd send. They go, ooh, ah, we're like, wow, I guess they like it. It was like this instantaneous feedback. Whereas, in the aerospace industry, you can wait a decade or more before your work comes to fruition.
Right.
So it was really kind of cool. It was a pretty neat experience. But that also got me to Southern California, and I actually started teaching at Azusa Pacific during that same time frame. And that too very much felt like it's exactly where God wanted me.
Yeah.
And I was able to run a science, faith, and culture seminar series on campus during that time frame, and kind of sit at the feet of people who had been studying the interaction or the interface between science and faith for many years. So I realized that I probably gave you a longer background snippet than you were asking for.
No, there's so many, and that's exactly what I wanted, because there's so many facets of this. One of the things we talked about offline before we joined in here was how we would not have picked our paths for ourselves.
Absolutely.
But yet God has guided us and directed us in a story that we could not come up with. But one where he's very much in the midst of it. And so I appreciate you sharing all of that. And I still feel like there's so much we haven't talked about, but just the fascinating story of where God takes you if you're willing to let him follow, or willing to let him lead and willing to follow.
Absolutely.
And so, you've done some really cool things in your life. And I'd love to hear, I'm very interested in your astronaut training and, kind of what that looked like. But was there anything in your training as a corporate astronaut that really you can think back and say, that really kind of solidified this thing about faith and science? Because I know a lot of people look out at the universe and, there's a lot of different takes you can have on that. But what comes to mind when you think about those days?
Oh my goodness, there's so much, and let's see. I guess the one thing that I would reference is really learning about how impossible the odds are to get a planet like Earth that
Mm,
is life friendly. I mean,
yeah.
I say impossible, and I don't really like that word. It's inadequate to describe what I'm talking about. Improbable is probably an understatement. So you look at the odds of getting all of these life-friendly characteristics all together in one space, in one tiny planet,
Yeah.
in this vast universe. And you look at that, and for me, that's probably one of the, if not the most powerful apologetics tools
Yeah.
in this interface between science and faith. And basically, what I'm talking about is referred to as the fine-tuning argument or the teleological argument or the Goldilocks principle or the
Hmm.
anthropic principle. And it basically says that there's this very long and even growing list of universal parameters that are finely tuned to be just basically exactly what they are in order to get life in anywhere in the universe,
Yeah.
essentially. And if any one of those parameters is off by just a little, it all falls apart and you
Mm.
can't sustain life. And some of my friends at Reasons to Believe have calculated kind of an estimated odds of getting all of these things together to be exactly what they are to support life.
Yeah.
And those odds are somewhere around one chance in 10 to the 282nd power. And those are numbers we can't really get our brains around. But the analogy that they came up with is it's like one person playing the lottery on just one ticket they buy and winning on that one ticket that they buy for each drawing twice a week,
Yep.
every week for 50 years in a row.
Wow.
And I'll use that example with my students all the time. What if you read a news story that said that somebody had been able to do that? What would your first reaction be? And they will always unanimously say, well, it has to be rigged.
Yeah.
And I'm like, bingo.
There you go.
You're exactly right. The universe is rigged for life. It's not going to happen by random chance. Then that's why I use the word impossible.
Yeah.
Because I mean, statisticians will say anytime anything goes beyond one chance in 10 to the 50th power, it's not just improbable, but it's statistically impossible because too many things have to go right.
Right.
So, I mean, it takes more faith to believe that this universe came to be just exactly what it is
Yeah.
and can support life on planet Earth than it does to believe that there is a creative intelligence out there that made it this way.
Absolutely. That's one of the strongest tools I think that we have in explaining the origin of the universe. If there are others, but I remember in teaching this to my young adults, it's the Goldilocks. I love the Goldilocks principle
Yeah,
because
yeah,
we can all relate to that, right?
exactly.
Yeah, it's not too hot, not too warm, but it's just right,
Exactly.
And some of those numbers are just, you could say, astronomical, pun intended.
Yeah,
But
right.
but yeah, I mean, it's almost like, and here's the way I explained it: it would take a miracle.
Exactly. That's
And you know
exactly.
what? We got one, didn't we?
Yes. But we've
It
got
would
a
take
God
it would
of
take a
miracles.
creative miracle behind that,
Absolutely.
and it did, and we call him
Yeah,
God.
exactly.
So I love that. Yeah, and I'm a big Reasons to Believe fan. I had Jeff Zweerink on the show
Oh, yeah.
not long ago, and Ken Samples too.
Yeah,
Those guys are phenomenal, doing great work as well.
absolutely.
But you're a little bit everywhere, and I love that because you can kind of speak to several different things. But that's so fascinating to me. I've always been fascinated by outer space. I think a lot of us are.
Yeah.
And so having some of that training and you being able to step back and realize, man, things have to be just right.
Yeah. Yeah,
Um,
exactly. Yeah,
and
and in fact,
realizing. Go ahead.
I was just going to say that, it's interesting because working in the aerospace industry,
Hmm.
you get all of these different kind of ideas about why are we exploring Mars? Why are we interested in Mars?
Yeah.
And, you know, some people will talk about how we need a kind of emergency evacuation route or place, right? And coming from my perspective, I'm sorry, but you look anywhere else in our solar system and you see nothing but hostile planets,
Yeah.
right? And Mars is hostile too. It's
Yeah.
granted, it's less hostile than any of the other planets in our solar system, but it's still hostile. Any breathable oxygen, the atmosphere is only 1/100th of the Earth's atmospheric pressure. There's no liquid water. All of the water on the planet is frozen in ice. It would have to be mined. The gravity is too low to hold on to high atmospheric pressure that we need to basically balance the tissues in our body and basically keep us from becoming freeze dried. The gravity is too weak to produce a water cycle. A liquid or even gaseous water vapor would escape the planet very quickly. So you can't have a water cycle. You could, there's been talk about the idea of, could we terraform Mars? Well, this one basic problem of gravity is not easily overcome. I mean, basically, you would have to increase the mass of the planet in order to increase gravity, and that's just not practical. I mean, it's just not feasible.
Well, and some of those arguments that are against, or not arguments, but some of those laws that we see that are against life on Mars are the very things that gives us the capability of life here.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly. We have all this. We have the right gravity to hold on to water vapor, so we can have a water cycle. I mean, so many things about the Earth's design, if you will, make it habitable. And so when you start looking out into space, this is where this came from for me, is like you start looking out into space and seeing what these other planets are like and how hostile they are. It makes you appreciate planet Earth.
Yeah.
And instead of, kind of going to Mars, I'm all about human spaceflight and exploration. I think, that's God built into us this spirit of exploration, and that's all well and good. And it pushes our technology forward, which can actually benefit healthcare industries and, technology and all of these things can be used for benefit of humans. But the reality is that we've been gifted this amazing planet that's just exactly right. And so instead of saying, okay, well, we're going to go and colonize Mars and make it a new Earth or whatever, it's like, what about being good stewards of the perfect Earth that we have? I mean, I use that word perfect. It's not perfect, but this good Earth that God created for us. Why not be good stewards of that?
And that's a really good segue and into the next thing I wanted to ask you, because one of the things that I think that we naturally come to when we see, how good this Earth is how well we steward it.
Yes.
God gives, and stewardship is, call that a churchy word or whatever. Sometimes we throw that word out there, but just taking good care of what God gave us.
Absolutely.
That can look a lot of different ways. That could be taking care of the Earth. That could be taking care of, the many gifts and financial things and our talents and different things like that. But you are doing some really good work with climate and with a stewardship of the Earth. And I'd love to get your take on that. What does it look like for us, particularly leading as Christians, to be good stewards of this Earth that we've been given?
Absolutely. And in fact, I've often said and written about this topic that, we as Christians have been given the charge from God to be good stewards of what he's created. Yeah. And so we should be leading the charge in terms of taking care of the Earth. And
I agree.
Unfortunately, I've heard too many times, oh, well, this is just our temporary home and, we don't have to worry about it. And it's like, it's just not leading by example. And it's not even following our scriptural commands to be good stewards, take care of the Earth, and every step of creation in the Genesis account is followed by, and God saw what he'd made and it was good. If God's calling it good, I mean, who are we to dismiss the goodness of the Earth, and just, I think we have a huge calling. I mean, there's throughout scripture, there are verses that talk about how we're to care for the Earth and what God's created. And I, as I said before, I think we should be leading the charge there. And, so when it comes to, the climate change that we are observing. A lot of people say, well, the climate's always been changing, and there's some truth to that. But if you look at the ice core samples that go back hundreds of thousands of years, you see this very regular pattern of about 90,000 years worth of severe ice, where ice is essentially encasing the planet, aside from a small strip around the equator, followed by 10,000 years of temperate climate, which is the type of climate that we're in right now, although we're somewhere around 12,000 years into this temperate climate. So this temperate cycle is longer by quite a bit than the average 10,000 years. So by about 20% longer than the average. And so if anything, when we look at climate, we should be seeing a decrease in overall temperatures and not an increase. And so when I first started looking into the climate science, that was one of the first things that caught my attention is we're actually trending the wrong direction for this just to be accounted for by natural cycles.
Yeah.
And so I think, what I've also learned about climate is it's very complex. Actually, so in the aerospace industry where I work, one of the people I was working for actually saw from my resume that I was very interested in environmental stewardship. And so an opportunity came up to do something with regard to climate change and looking at the impacts of climate change on national security issues. And so they asked me if I'd be interested in that. And so I kind of grabbed hold of that and ran. It was a great opportunity, And as I said, the fact that this is, you can't account for it by the natural cycles that Earth goes through, really got my attention. And also the complexity of understanding climate. Climate is different than weather, right?
Yeah.
Weather's what's going on from day to day, and high variability. Climate is really about averages, and averages are different in different parts of the world and whatnot, but the overall average temperatures of both, all three, the air, the land, and the oceans are climbing.
That's a helpful definition too, I think, as we sometimes get those two things confused.
Yeah, exactly. When the East Coast is getting hammered by snow and we're having 90-degree weather out here on the West Coast, it's like things are pretty wonky. But that is actually one of the predictions of climate change. Is if you remember from your high school physics class, heat is a form of energy, and so with increasing temperatures, there's more heat energy available for these more violent storms. Which we're seeing a huge increase in the frequency of violent storms of different kinds. And also one of the other things that is predicted by the warming temperatures is this unpredictability of normal weather patterns. And we certainly are seeing that as well.
Yeah.
But all that to say, climate, sorry, I just wanted to.
So we've seen that here in Georgia.
Yeah, absolutely.
Where I live, I've lived here I've lived here in Middle Georgia for about 15 years. And for the first 13 years, we had no snow here.
Wow.
It would freeze and we'd be like, look, we survived the blizzard, sarcastically.
Right.
In the last 2 years, it has snowed here and like a good bit. And so we're seeing this. But then like the next weekend, we'll have really unseasonably warm temperatures. And then we had tornadoes and then followed by snow the next day.
Wow.
This was just the other week.
Wow.
And so what you're saying is really resonating with me because I'm like, yes, the unpredictability. It's not it's not this pattern necessarily, but it's the unpredictability of some of these patterns.
Yeah. And disruption of normal patterns. And what we've had here in California this year has just been crazy too. We've gotten more kind of rain in short periods of time, short bursts, followed by these really high temperatures. And, the plants are just going crazy. I mean, we had spring levels of pollen in January. It's just ridiculous. And, the plants are just confused. It's like they bloom and then they shrivel up when it gets cold and rainy again. And then they try to bloom again. I mean, it's just nuts. But anyway, so all those things. So what I was getting around to saying is climate is very complex in terms of kind of understanding it. And you have to have decades upon decades of data to really figure out true trends. And so it's very complex. So I guess what I'm trying to say with that, and this is kind of my approach to science in general. A lot of people think that science is a one and done kind of thing, and it really isn't. I mean, the scientific method basically looks for the best explanation given the current set of evidence that we have, all the while knowing that we could have new evidence turn up at any time that would cause us to question what's gone before and possibly
Sure.
revise the best explanation. And so with regard to climate, we have to approach it with humility like we do every other scientific endeavor, knowing that we don't know everything. And as an inductive process, again, induction is very different than deduction.
Yeah.
Deduction, you can make these if this is true, then this follows statements. But in science, again, we're looking for the best explanation for the total accumulation of evidence that we've collected. And science can disprove things and say, no, that hypothesis does not fit with this evidence. But it's never a rock solid 100%. Okay, this is 100% proven by science. Science doesn't work that way.
Mm-hmm.
And so again, we have to approach this climate science with humility as well and say, we don't know what's right around the corner. We've got climate models that can, give predictions and whatnot. But a lot of our climate models are under predicting what's happening. With for example, one of the things that I studied due to the project I was working on was the, like I say, national security impacts from climate change. And one of the main things we were looking at was the melting of the Arctic ice, because, the ice in the Arctic had been frozen solid for basically all of the human history that we'd been observing it. And now, we've got the Northwest Passage is opening up essentially every late summer and early fall. And as the ice melts more and more, you can imagine climate models predict that eventually there will be little to no ice around in the summers in the Arctic. And so you can think about, like I say, studying national security impacts. It's like simple border patrol.
Yeah.
Now, we've never had to worry about that border in the past of our continent. And so you can think about the things that, are of concern. But as I said, the climate models generally are more conservative than what we're actually seeing in the real empirical world. So like I say, I'm not trying to be an alarmist or anything like that. But at the same time, we need to at least pay attention to the evidence that's being collected. And given that, be good stewards of what we know. We need to act on what we know. We know that it's a good thing to take care of the good earth that God's given us. We know that it's a good thing to prevent pollution, whether that's air or water or land. We need to act on the things that we know are good stewardship. We might not know what's right around the corner in terms of climate change and whatnot, but we know that we need to be good stewards of the planet. And there are some very basic things that we can do to be better stewards, kind of the reduce, reuse, recycle thing. I mean, that's just basic common sense.
Yeah. And it's something everybody can do.
Exactly. Don't overburden the planet and its resources. Let's be good stewards. And especially, I mean, again, from a Christian perspective, aside from just stewardship of the good earth that God's given us, is being loving towards other people in our growing population around the world that, don't have as much access to the earth's resources as we do. And that reduce, reuse, recycle thing benefits the entire globe. So, I mean, just out of love for our fellow people that God has created in his image,
Yeah. Not to mention the generations that will follow.
Exactly. Absolutely.
And leaving it as good or better than we found it, which seems
Absolutely
harder and harder every day.
Yeah.
I love how you describe science as this ever-evolving field, because I think some people in today's world kind of mock science for that reason. For example, in the medical field, we'll have a set of guidelines that come out and say, hey, fat is, we know eating a high-fat diet can cause you to have heart disease. And then a few years later, Okay, well, maybe not. Maybe dietary cholesterol isn't the bad thing we thought it was. It's okay to eat eggs again, guys. And so you start seeing some of these shifts and these transitions,
Yeah.
and people are like, well, science don't know what they're talking about.
Yeah.
These scientists don't know what they're talking about. When in reality, that's how science works.
Exactly.
There's
Exactly.
all the time more and more research, and then taking that new research and combining it together with what we've come up with before,
Yeah.
and then realizing that, okay, now we've got to create, what this tells us today. And that may be different than what we learned about a few years ago.
Exactly. That's exactly right.
And with climate, it's no different.
Exactly.
I really think that's helpful as we think about science. So
Yeah.
thank you for saying that.
Absolutely. I mean, just one more thing to throw in
Yeah.
there is as time goes on, our technology improves
Yeah.
to make better observations and measurements and that sort of thing too. So we can measure things a lot better than we could a decade ago
Yeah.
in essentially any field that you want to point at, whether it's astronomy or medicine or just about anything.
Yeah, really good point. And then I want to ask you this question, because the longer I follow Christ, I guess I'll say, and the more, I guess, mature that he tends to create us, I think we find ourselves not really following one political party or the other. At least that's where I find myself.
Yeah.
Neither one, completely lines up. Why
Yeah.
has climate change, just in your experience, become so politicized? To me, I feel like we just politicize everything today. But
We absolutely.
what's your take on that?
Can I take a pass on this question?
You plead a fifth?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I wish I had a good answer for
Okay.
it. I think, there's a lot of different opinions on this. And, I think part of it is possibly a distrust in science, like you've just mentioned. There are other factors, I think, too. And I mean, we've got some industries that are dependent on fossil fuels. At least, things are starting to change in those areas, I think. Maybe not as fast as we'd like them to, but so there are some,
lobbyists in those.
some interest groups that
Yeah.
don't feel like their interests align with climate science and climate change. I think there are a lot of reasons. I think I kind of alluded to one earlier, which is just kind of the idea that, some people think, well, Jesus is coming back anytime and he, is going to create a new heaven and a new earth. So why do we need to worry about this one?
Kind of an escapist idea.
Escapist. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But, and also just kind of being, I'm not going to say ignoring it willfully, but just maybe not understanding the Christian call to stewardship that is so important.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think there's, some, and, I think we've all probably experienced this at one time or another where the truth might be hard to swallow for one reason or another. It doesn't align with your current worldview. It might require some rethinking of some things. But I've found, I've talked about this a lot just in terms of, our call to stewardship, and just kind of doing what we know, being good stewards of what we know. And I've found most Christian audiences are really open to that.
Yeah.
Even if they haven't, kind of heard it from that perspective before. So, I think, and I also think it can be a really good witness to people that are outside the faith if we're taking that call seriously.
I love that. Really good answer. Really helpful. Basically, what we're saying is it's complicated. Just like what we said about climate. There's so many factors. There's so much that we may not understand, and I believe it's our job, particularly as Christians, to dig into what does the Word say about it.
Yeah.
That's really where I find myself lately. Is, what does God say about it? What does God's Word say about it? Because it speaks to a lot of things that I think a casual glance may not necessarily tell us.
Yeah. I think leading with love and humility is just, the way to be a winsome witness,
I don't know it all.
Exactly.
Good place to start. Yeah.
Right. Exactly. Then, that's something that I think most people can relate to. It's like, maybe some people are more willing to admit that than others, but I think that if you lead with that and say,
Hmm.
hey, I don't have all the answers, and there, you're going to ask me some questions that I don't have an answer for. But it shows some humility. And I think humility is a great starting point for open, honest communication,
Yeah.
rather than kind of just coming in and trying to tell people how they should think about things.
I love how your journey started as a missionary, this calling to be a missionary. And Leslie, you are.
Yeah.
You're a missionary where you are. And one of the things we talked about offline, kind of as we head towards wrapping up here, is that we both have this calling to take complexity and make it simple, make it
Yes.
more simple. And one of the things that you do in your day job is with that. There's an upcoming mission, the Artemis mission.
That's right.
So back to space a little bit.
Yeah.
And you've written an article about that. I'd love for you to share a little bit of your thoughts on that
Yeah. Yeah.
as it relates to the mission and the work, some of the work you've done there too.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. So it's pretty exciting. We're looking at a human mission to the moon for the first time in 50 years. And, this Artemis mission will actually go around the backside of the moon, and it will actually take humans further away from the Earth than they've ever been. So the particular trajectory that this flight will be on will go further than the Apollo missions did. So it will actually set a record for humans' farthest distance of travel from the Earth. But it's going to be basically the first in a series of human missions to the moon. This one's not going to land on the moon, but it'll be followed by some more test flights. And then eventually we'll be landing humans on the moon. And then we're looking at building a permanent manned base on the moon. And that will then be a staging point for missions to Mars. So it's all very exciting. I've been involved in looking at the life support systems for a moon mission as well as Mars missions. But work that we've been doing recently has been focusing on the Artemis missions and making sure that we have what we need for the life support systems. And so it's pretty exciting to be a part of that. And history in the making, so to speak. So
Absolutely.
very exciting.
Yeah, I look forward to following that. I wasn't alive last time that happened with the Apollo missions, and I can't wait because the technology is so much better. I feel like we're going to get all of these visuals and a lot more than we could last time. So
Absolutely.
man, it truly is an open frontier, isn't it?
It absolutely is. And it's also, it's a time for reflecting too, just in terms of, and I do some of this in the article that we'll be posting on Biologos's website before too long. Just reflecting on the fact that, humans are created in God's image. And part of that is being endowed with his creativity, and the creativity and the kind of vision and the spirit of exploration that enables these missions. It's nothing short of remarkable. I mean, just the idea that, God built that into us.
Yeah.
And this idea that we can explore God's creation through the gifts that he's given us and the capabilities that he's given us in being a reflection of him. So it's very exciting. And then, we probably don't have time to go into this now, but the whole idea of the scale of the universe and how massive it is. And James Webb Space Telescope, has revealed even more grandeur in the universe, both in terms of the scale and the formation of galaxies really early on in the universe, and just the idea of scale and how massive the universe is can be kind of daunting as we think about it. And just, it can make us feel really small and possibly insignificant. But the reality is that, nowhere else that we know of did God prepare such a special place for us to live. And just the care in fine tuning these parameters that God put into this planet to create this space for. I mean, I tell my students a lot of times, we are not a biology experiment. It's not, that God was sitting there saying, well, let's see how bleak we can make the circumstances and see if these beings can still survive. And created this environment where we can flourish and thrive, and pursue things other than just basic survival, like contemplating the stars and missions to the moon and Mars and whatnot. So, I mean, I think to me, it just, again, speaks to God's love for us.
Speaks to his goodness. And
absolutely.
thankful for his goodness. And yeah, as you look out at the stars, as you look out at this creation God has made, sure, there's brokenness, but you can't look at all that's around us and say, there's no God. That's
It doesn't
that's
make
my
sense.
mind. That's
Yeah.
my conviction. Romans
Yeah.
1 kind of tells us that a little bit too, that he's revealed himself to us.
Yes. The truth about God can be seen in his creation.
Yeah. Yeah. So he is a good God. He is a great God.
Absolutely.
He is big. He is mighty. He is powerful, but he cares for you. And
Absolutely.
what an important truth that is.
Yeah.
Well, Leslie, what a gift you are.
Thank you.
Such a fascinating story. I'd love to. I told you, man, I feel like we could talk for hours. I'm not sure who would listen, but I'm just fascinated by all the work that you're doing. And I'm thankful for you, thankful for your voice, thankful for you leaning into that and using it for the glory of God. How can my
Amen.
listeners find out more about you and the work that you're doing?
Yeah. Well, check out my website, starrynights.me. That's actually the name of my nonprofit is called Starry Nights Incorporated. And I'm actually working on collaborating with some campus ministries to reach out to college campuses with this conversation about science and faith. And that's kind of
Cool.
my main near-term goal is to kind of get the ball rolling on that. So that website is a great place to connect. You can also find me on Instagram. I've got a couple of Facebook pages, one for Starry Nights and one for the WISH program, which is actually a reflection of a Templeton grant that just wrapped up a little while back to support women in the science and faith space.
Okay.
So check all those out and get in touch with me through those various sites.
I'll put links to all those in the show notes too. But
Okay.
Leslie, thank you again for spending time with us, for sharing your voice with us, and for the important work you're doing in this world. I appreciate you and your missionary journey that has landed
Thank
you where
you
you
so
are.
much.
God bless you too.